going to hell down here in Texas.
Oh, yeah. What's up, everybody? This is episode number 232 of the Lone Gunman Podcast. This is your boy, Big Bad Bob, otherwise known as just Rob Clark, here with you for another exciting episode of the Lone Gunman Podcast. It's a pleasure to be back with you on this beautiful spring day. A couple of things to start the show off with. I'm excited to tell you that my buddy Roger, who does the music here at the Lone Gunman Podcast and is responsible for our intro and our outro songs now, has released another song. And it is mind-blowingly awesome. So make sure you stick around to the end of the show to hear the new outro. It is called Conspiracy by Shepherd on Fire. And it has everything to do with the Kennedy assassination. Listen to the lyrics. The music rocks, but listen to the lyrics as well. So stick around to the end of the show for your Lone Gunman exclusive premiere of Conspiracy by Shepherd on Fire from my buddy Roger. That's exciting news. Also, I wanted to let everybody know that the Lone Gunman Podcast has a brand new sponsor. That's right. If you love this show and you love your boy and you want to support the show, it's real simple. If you love hot sauce, like I do, then I have a treat for you folks. Because I'm bringing aboard a sponsor of the show. It's called Silk City Hot Sauces. And every bottle you buy, they'll kick back a little bit to your boy. And there's something in there for you as well. 20% off your entire order using the code GUNMAN. So now, without further ado, I'll bring to you my new version of the Silk City Hot Sauce commercial that took me only an hour and a half to complete this less than 2 minute long ad. So, without further ado, here we go. Big Bad Bob here with you for Silk City Hot Sauces. Why Silk City? Because this hot sauce comes to you directly from Paterson, New Jersey, also known as Silk City. These hot sauces are 100% natural, gluten-free, vegan, contain no chemicals, fillers, dyes, or junk. Everything is packed into recyclable glass containers because glass doesn't leach weird flavors into the product. All other hot sauces are sourced in small batches from locally bought fresh peppers. It's all about the pepper, people. I'm telling you. Your boy, Big Bad Bob, loves his food like he loves his women. Hot and spicy, but not so hot you can't eat them. So, if you love yourself some sauce and you're tired of trying to transform your bland meat into something edible, with the tip of a jar, you will transform your life forever. Head over to silkcityhotsauce.com, place an order, and upon checkout, enter the code GUNMAN, that's GUNMAN, for 20% off of your entire order. You won't regret it. Thank me later. Peace. And there you have it, folks. What a beautiful, beautiful jingle. Yeah. It only took an hour and a half to perfect. I could have done a whole show on outtakes, and it probably would have had you all laughing hysterically. But I did not record any of the outtakes, thankfully. Although I could have compiled, like I said, about an hour and a half's worth of me barely getting through anything, or me all the way getting through something and then screwing it up somehow and cussing emphatically. But there it is. And big thank you to Jeff over at Silk City Hot Sauce, folks. I have tried it. Trust me, it's good stuff. My favorite is hot syrup. Okay, I slather that shit all over my chicken, burgers, steak. You can add it to chili. It's amazing, and it's hot. Don't get me wrong, but it's not so hot that you can't actually eat it and enjoy it. It's flavorful, and it's not one of those novelty hot sauces that see how hot you can stand, and you and your friend do something stupid on social media. No, this is made to be eaten and enjoyed. So check it out. Um, so on this show, we're going to talk a little bit about something I came across from a very old book, and I believe the book is called Reasonable Doubt by Henry Hurt, and something in there about this gentleman by the name of Robert Easterling, not to be confused with Jake Easterling of the CIA. This is somebody totally different. Robert Easterling. Now we all know my
main goal is to blow up and then act like I don't know nobody.
no, I'm joking. My main goal is to inform you guys of just everything that I can about the Kennedy assassination in all forms or fashion, various parts, nooks and crannies, dark corners, crusty, shadowy, cobwebby corners of everything, so that you have the most complete picture from which to put your puzzle together from all of these little puzzle pieces that I feed you. I give you all these puzzle pieces. I want you to put them in a bag somewhere. Put them in a bag. And then one day, I want you to dump out all those pieces and see if you can put the puzzle back together again and make it mean something. Make it be cohesive. So, I always like to revisit, old literary stuff. And this is something that I had not actually heard or read about in a very long time. So, I thought I'd bring it to your attention today. Um, so this guy, Robert Wilfred Easterling, is a multiple felon, ex-convict, raging alcoholic, a diagnosed psychotic and schizophrenic. He is physically powerful. He has a bellicose personality, a very violent temperament, whose family members have so feared him that on several occasions they obtained court orders to commit him to mental institutions. He has been charged with assault and convicted for burglary and bootlegging. In addition to these matters of record, Easterling is a self-confessed multiple murderer. He claims to have conspired in 1953 in an insurance fraud scheme in which he and another man placed a bomb in a national airlines plane with 46 people aboard. The DC-6 airliner was lost in the Gulf of Mexico, and to this day, there is no certain official explanation for that crash. The official report suggests that extreme weather conditions probably caused the crash. All lives were lost. One witness to the purported bombing conspiracy was an 18-year-old boy, to whom Easterling claims he may dig a grave and then executed him by shooting him through the back of the head. So, yeah, real nice guy here, this Richard Easterling, so far. Equally gruesome is the horrific account related by a close member of Easterling's family of a time when Easterling teased his wife and daughter by tossing flaming papers onto a bed where they were reading and threatened to butcher them with a large knife if they tried to escape. At the last moment, he relented and they survived without serious physical injury. He once tried to drown his wife in a hot tub or bathtub and then left her for dead. There is reliable reports that Easterling has been involved in child prostitution rings. And Easterling himself admits to additional crimes ranging from safe cracking to running an interstate car theft operation in the Deep South. He also claims to have been involved with the Communist Party in Milwaukee as an informant for the FBI. So, already a grade A piece of shit kind of guy. It is this man who, on September the 28th, picked up the telephone and called Henry Hurt to describe his connection to still another crime, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. In vivid detail, Easterling portrayed himself as a low-level conspirator, intimately involved in certain plans that led to President Kennedy's death in Dallas on November 22, 1963. His stated motive for coming forward with a confession was that he believed he was dying and he wanted to clear his conscience. He blamed the private hell he'd lived in, the belief that he could have prevented the assassination, for the fact that he has been committed to several mental institutions. The confession of Robert Easterling was approached with enormous skepticism. Some of Easterling's stories about matters unrelated to the assassination ranged from the fanciful to the absurd. One example being his claim to have had a warm, personal relationship with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, if you know what I'm saying. Wink, wink. Easterling states the friendship was so close that Hoover would slip away from Washington, fly to New Orleans by himself, hire a car, and travel 80 miles to Baton Rouge, where he would confer with Easterling and his penis. Anyone with the slightest knowledge of Hoover knows that such a story is preposterous. Claims such as this make it easy to understand the comments in psychiatric reports noting Easterling's grandiose delusions, comments echoed by many people who have known the man since the assassination. 75 hours were spent by the author in face-to-face interviews with Robert Easterling, including trips with him to areas where he declares events took place that are related to the assassination. Dozens more hours have been spent in telephone conversations. Born in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, on June 30th, 1926, Easterling dropped out of high school to travel with the rodeo, and thus earned the nickname of Cowboy Bob Easterling. Later, he learned to work on engines, and his most frequent legitimate occupation has been a diesel mechanic working for oil drilling companies and construction contractors, primarily in Texas, Ohio, Louisiana, and Mississippi. At times, he operated a bulldozer. And it was this sort of work that earned him his best-known sobriquet, Hard Hat. That is a fancy fucking French name for nickname. So this guy's nickname was Hard Hat. He has lived under several false names. His most commonly used alias during the years following the assassination was the name George Taylor. Pieced together, Easterling's life, Easterling. I'm going to fuck this name up for the rest of the show, folks, just so you know. It's so close to Jake Easterling, which I'm so used to saying. Sorry. So Easterling's life is that of a quintessential loser. Loser! The partially redeeming feature noted by friends, enemies, family, and employers is that Easterling possesses a bright and inventive mind, although one terribly ravaged by alcoholism. It was this very characteristic of brightness that caused the most concern in trying to verify the confession of Robert Easterling. Was it all fabrication? one so masterfully and subtly turned that there was just enough enticing elements to lure one in. Under the best of circumstances, only the periphery of his story could be checked. So from the start, it was clear there would be no tidy package of confirmation, no chance of a claim that the confession checked out beyond a reasonable doubt. Funny, because that's the title of this book. Despite all these negative factors, Easterling's account of his participation in the assassination conspiracy was verified in ways that, even if peripheral, simply could not be ignored. Soon after Easterling's telephone call, the author sent a registered letter to FBI Director William Webster, describing the circumstances of Easterling's confession. The letter also informed Webster that Easterling claimed knowledge of other grimly serious crimes. In response to the letter, FBI agents were sent to talk to the author, who provided Easterling's address. And at the request of the FBI, the author also turned over current photographs of Easterling. In the 25,000 released FBI and Secret Service interviews of people claiming information about the assassination, there is not a single known example of an individual stepping forward to offer a confession of his own participation. I don't know if that's true. Robert Easterling was first committed to a mental institution in 1974, more than 10 years after the assassination. There is not a hint in the hospital records that he mentioned anything about the JFK case at that time. However, in subsequent commitments, notably after the assassination attempts against President Gerald Ford in 1975, Easterling got in touch with the FBI. Shortly afterward, he was interviewed by a Secret Service agent whom Easterling says he tried to persuade of the veracity of his account. He claimed the man he knew as the rifle marksman who killed Kennedy had said he hoped to kill the second United States president in his lifetime. The attempt on Ford was seen by Easterling as possible evidence of this, which is what he says first compelled him to turn to the authorities. However, indications are at that time Easterling has tried to provide his account to the FBI. He has been sent to the Secret Service. As late as 1982, the Secret Service again listened to Easterling's story, presumably as it might pertain to the safety of the current president. While little is known about how the Secret Service responded, it is fairly clear that the FBI never took him seriously. Following Easterling's release from his initial confinement to a mental institution, it appears he attempted several times to relate his story in a form where it might attract official attention. He knew that the Secret Service officials had nothing to do with investigating the murder of President Kennedy, and yet that was the direction in which he was always sent. He told the story to drinking companions and family members, and even attempted to interest various publications. For a host of reasons, a prominent one being Easterling's character and demeanor, nobody took him seriously. From the beginning, there has been obvious possibility that Easterling's story is a delusion or fabrication, or an elaborate hoax with antecedents so obscure that they can never be identified. But if his confession is a hoax, and to be sure, Easterling would have no compunction about committing any deception, then there is a fascinating story to be told by such an extraordinary scheme. So, like I said, he spent over 75 hours with this author, relating this countless more on the phone, face-to-face visits, things of this nature, all for an elaborate hoax. I don't know. Well, I mean, look how many hours Judith Mary Baker has committed to her hoax. So anything is possible, I suppose. So there's your little bit of background on Robert Easterling. So what does he say about his involvement in the Kennedy assassination? Well, interestingly enough, it starts off at the Havana Bar in Louisiana, owned by Orestes Pena. Now, in early 63, Easterling lived in a trailer park at the Windmill trailer court in Marrero, Louisiana, just across the Mississippi River from New Orleans. He was working for one of the dozens of oil companies located on the river's west side. His job at the time was primarily working on diesel engines, a trade at which he is an acknowledged expert. Even the company owner, who today claims Easterling was stealing from him, concedes that Easterling was a damn good mechanic. Easterling's job often took him across the river and into New Orleans, where using one of his company trucks, he picked up parts that are needed for his work. It was in this capacity that Easterling began stopping regularly to drink at the Havana Bar located at 117 Decatur Street. The Havana Bar did not cater to tourists from the heart of New Orleans, famed French Quarter a few blocks away. It was open 24 hours a day, but its chief customers were exiled Cubans, sailors in port, and some businessmen who worked in the large office buildings on Canal Street less than a block away. Directly across the narrow street from the Havana Bar was one side of the huge granite U.S. Customs building. Within blocks was the center of U.S. intelligence operations then going on around New Orleans. These operations related primarily to the official efforts of the U.S. government to instigate, through the Cuban exile community, the overthrow of the Castro regime. There is little question about the prominence of the Havana Bar as a haven for, Cuban exile activities in the early 60s. Horace Pena, the bar's owner, was a leading member of the CRC, otherwise known as the Cuban Revolutionary Council. Now, in this connection, Pena served as a source for the FBI. In 1982, Pena told the author that he had a similar relationship with the CIA. Indeed, such a dual relationship was not uncommon during these stormy days in New Orleans. Such government connections enhanced Pena's prominence, as well as the prominence of the Havana Bar in the Cuban exile cause. From the time of Castro's seizure of power in Cuba in January of 1959, New Orleans was a haven for displaced Cubans. First, there were the established professionals and government officials who had fled. And then came the wave of Cubans who decided that Castro was undesirable as a dictator they had helped him overthrow. Robert Easterling, naturally loquacious and a generous drinking companion, knew a smattering of Spanish. He fit easily into the camaraderie and intrigue that swirled through the Havana Bar, and he understood the disenchantment of the Cuban exiles. Invariably, President Kennedy was the focus of attention during heated arguments over what should be done about Castro. To some extent, all the diverse forces threatening Kennedy were present at the Havana Bar, creating in that establishment almost a microcosm of the city itself. It was in that bar, on a Friday afternoon in February of 1963, that Robert Easterling encountered an acquaintance who he declares enlisted him in a conspiracy that led to the death of John F. Kennedy. As he walked into the Havana Bar that afternoon, Easterling was wearing the white hard hat which had earned him his nickname. The Cuban who across the room called out to him, "Hey, hard hat! Hard hat!" Easterling, who is blind in one eye from an accident, peered through the dimness and to his surprise recognized the man. It was Manuel Rivera, an acquaintance who he had last seen in 1961. Since it was crowded around the bar, Easterling waved acknowledgement, took a seat at a nearby table, and ordered a drink. Spanish music blared from a jukebox. Men bantered with the girls who worked the bar, as well as with the prostitutes who hung around the establishment. Occasionally, Easterling overheard a discussion at the bar. Apparently, Manuel had just arrived in a small plane from Cuba bringing rum and cigars that were displayed behind the bar. Easterling had first met Manuel Rivera in November 1960. The Cuban was then just 25. Easterling describes him as being 5'6", stocky build, oval face, receding hairline, black mustache, and hairy arms. He also had a noticeable gold tooth and a brown birthmark on the right side of his neck. Easterling had been immediately impressed by Rivera's self-assurance and ingenuity. Yes, ingenuity in various illegal activities such as lock picking, safe cracking, and the procurement of young girls. At that time, Rivera was involved with organized crime in New Orleans as a numbers runner. Cubans with whom Easterling worked placed their weekly bets with Rivera in the mob's numbers racket. Easterling had occasionally asked Manuel to send him a prostitute at the Tamanaka Motel on Tulane Avenue, not far from the main district of New Orleans. He had been given a telephone number where he was able to reach Rivera on occasions when he wanted such services. He had last seen Rivera at a bar on Airline Highway outside New Orleans. There, he said, Rivera, Easterling, and several Cubans were in the company of a prominent U.S. military figure with whom they were discussing Cuban invasion plans. At the end of the conversation, Rivera told Easterling that they might not see each other again. Indeed, Easterling had not seen Manuel Rivera until that Friday afternoon. So where had he been? As he was later to tell Easterling, Rivera had lived through extraordinary adventures in the past 2 years. They were adventures, as he related them, which would leave a dispassionate observer dazed in trying to comprehend Manuel's true allegiances. He was to tell Easterling at various times that he was working for the CIA against Castro, only later to claim that in truth he was working all along for Castro as a double agent. He said that he had been one of the Cubans recruited by the CIA to kill Castro, but that he had tipped off the Cuban leader so that Castro was safe when the explosives intended to kill him were detonated. Manuel claimed to have warned Castro about the invasion planned at the Bay of Pigs. Rivera also told Easterling that since he last saw him, he had been captured by Castro during the Bay of Pigs invasion and then sent to the Soviet Union, where he received training in the Russian language as well as techniques of sabotage and assassination. But Easterling knew none of these things as he sat in the Havana bar that Friday afternoon. He was glad to see Rivera chiefly because he knew that Rivera possessed attributes that Easterling found useful in his own illegal activities. As he sat there, he noticed standing at the bar with Manuel one of the strangest looking men he had ever seen. The man had prominent dark eyes, but more notably was completely hairless, like a baby gerbil, without eyebrows, facial hair, or hair on his head. This was David W. Ferry, the man who had just flown Manuel to New Orleans from Cuba. From his seat, Easterling could see that the men had a rifle they were passing back and forth. Also present at the bar was a New Orleans businessman whom Easterling believes was Clay Shaw, along with a Cuban named Joe, whom Easterling had not been able to identify. When Ferry and his companions left, Easterling got up and approached Manuel Rivera, who had begun tending the bar. Rivera served Easterling a drink, and the two men began to renew their acquaintance. It was during this conversation that Rivera told him that he and the men who had just left the bar were hatching a plot to kill President Kennedy. Easterling recalls that Manuel had looked at him and said, "I want you to help us, and I'll pay you well." Easterling agreed. "Let's kill the bastard. He betrayed us at the Bay of Pigs." It was then that Rivera showed Easterling a magnificent Czech-made automatic rifle. He explained he had personally supervised its design and construction at a gun factory in Czechoslovakia. He pointed out a unique feature of the rifle, a catch box on the side, designed so that ejected shells would not be scattered and lost when fired. They would be caught in a cup-like box attached to the side of the rifle. Easterling examined the rifle. He noticed that the only imprint stated 7mm, which he assumed meant that it had used 7mm cartridges. Shortly after this, Easterling went with Rivera out to the bar and watched as he placed the Czech rifle in the back seat of his gray Volkswagen. There was already another rifle in the car's seat, which Easterling declares was a Mannlicher Carcano, make allegedly used by Oswald to kill President Kennedy. Back inside the bar, Rivera explained that he needed a barrel of water into which he could fire the Mannlicher Carcano rifle. He wanted to retrieve the bullets. Manuel said he needed to shoot them from the tailgate of a truck so that he could collect the ejected shells from the back of the truck. He also wanted a place where he could fire the Czech automatic he had just bought in from Cuba. Easterling assured Rivera that he could accommodate him in the spacious open field behind the trailer park where he lived across the river from New Orleans. So the following afternoon, around 4 o'clock, Manuel Rivera arrived at Easterling's trailer. Easterling drove his pickup truck down into a large field behind the trailer park. He backed the truck up until it was just beside a large barrel of water that was in the field. Manuel loaded the Mannlicher Carcano and stood on the tailgate of the truck and fired downward into the water. Then the two men searched the back of the truck and found the ejected cartridge shells. Manuel dropped them into his pocket. After that, the men dumped over the barrel of water and retrieved the slugs. Manuel held one of them up in front of Easterling and told him that someday that slug would be famous. After Manuel pocketed the slugs, Easterling saw three men arrive in a large car. The first two were David Ferry and the man he believed to be Clay Shaw. The third man was the Cuban who had been with him at the bar, a man called Joe, who had a slightly deformed hand. Manuel removed 3 traffic cones from his Volkswagen and placed them in staggered positions several feet apart, about 250 feet from where the men were standing. Upon each cone, Manuel placed a coconut. Then he walked to the spot where the other men had gathered. Manuel removed the checkmate automatic rifle. The Cuban known as Joe, held a stopwatch in his slightly deformed hand. Manuel fired quickly, drilling each of the coconuts. The time was a little over 5 seconds. "Scratch one, Kennedy," said the Cuban with the stopwatch. "That'll get the job done," was the comment from the man Easterling thought was Clay Shaw. David Ferry didn't say anything. He just smiled. Meanwhile, Easterling's wife was in their trailer in sight of the field where the men were shooting. She has told the author that while she recalls some men coming to the trailer park, she has no idea who they were. Although it was not unusual for men to target practice in the field on Saturday afternoons, there were several unusual details that have caused the event to stick in her mind. Before any of the shooting started, she recalled Easterling came to the trailer and demanded that she give him some dishcloths. It happened that she had several of them that she had just bought, and it was with some irritation that she let him have them. 25 years later, Easterling was asked what he remembered about using dishcloths that day, and at first he recalled nothing. Then, after a few minutes, he remembered that indeed he and Manuel had tried unsuccessfully to suspend the dishcloths about halfway down in the barrel of water in order to catch the bullets in the cloth and thus avoid having to dump out all the water and risk losing the bullets. However, they realized the idea wouldn't work and abandoned it. Easterling was surprised that his former wife recalled the dishcloths. And there's an author's note says, "Today she is remarried and spoke only with me with an agreement of anonymity." For his services that afternoon, Robert Easterling claims he was paid $500. That was easy money, even easier than cracking a safe. He eagerly awaited the next chance to do some work for Manuel Rivera. The following Friday evening in late February, in another incident verified by both Mrs. Easterling and one of her neighbors, a large white car stopped near their trailer. It remained there for more than 2 hours before Easterling got home. The several men, in the car appeared to be Cubans. Mrs. Easterling was terrified when she saw the strangers watching her trailer. When Easterling arrived at the trailer and saw the car and heard his wife's report, he telephoned Rivera, who told him he was aware of the car. The men inside, he said, had guns with silencers and cans of gas. They want to kill you and your wife and burn your trailer to the ground, Rivera said. He explained that the Cubans feared that the Easterlings would talk about the events they observed the preceding Saturday in the field behind the trailer court. Manuel said he would be there in a few minutes. Waiting for Manuel to get there, Mrs. Easterling recalls the terror she felt as she crouched on the floor of the trailer with the lights off, keeping her crying children from going to a window. Moments later, the fear passed. Manuel arrived and ordered the men away. About 6 weeks later, perhaps early April, Easterling stopped to drink at the Havana bar. He was driving his brand new 1963 Ford XL painted yellow and black. It was a car he is still very proud of. Easterling states that he was in the bar drinking and talking to Rivera, and they were discussing in general terms the murder of Kennedy. It was then that Manuel stated to Easterling's surprise that he wanted a photograph of Hard Hat, that he needed a permanent record of all the men who were involved in such historically significant business. Yeah, that's not sketchy at all. Two men, a Cuban and another American, accompanied them to Easterling's car, and where Manuel got behind the wheel. Hard Hat got in the back seat, and balls of cotton were placed over his eyes and held in place by a large bandana so that he could see nothing. Manuel drove for about 30 minutes, perhaps going in circles. At the destination, Manuel referred to only as headquarters, the blindfold was removed. Easterling, wearing his hard hat, was photographed with a studio-type camera. Then his fingerprints were taken. Easterling noticed that the lettering on the fingerprint cards was in Spanish. A photocopy was made of his driver's license, which bore his real name. It was a moment Easterling would never forget. Until that time, Easterling believes Manuel and the others, who had only called him Hard Hat, had not really known his true identity. Afterward, Manuel showed Easterling a heavily constructed rectangular wooden box, which he had himself built. Odd in dimensions, it was 5 feet long, 3 feet wide, 4 feet high. In the floor was a false bottom, concealing a compartment that housed a spring tension cradle designed to hold a rifle securely. Manuel then picked up the check-made automatic rifle, secured it in the cradle, and replaced the false floor. According to Easterling, no one would suspect that the heavy box contained anything. It appeared to be empty. Easterling and Rivera returned to the Havana bar. Again, Manuel drove while Hard Hat, blindfolded, sat in the back with the Cuban. At one point, the Cuban became agitated, pulled out a pistol, and pressed it against Easterling's temple. He accused him of being an FBI agent. Easterling frantically denied it, and Manuel ordered the man to put away the pistol, explaining that Hard Hat was part of the team. Once back at the Havana bar, huddled together so others could not overhear them, Manuel explained the details of the assassination plan to Easterling. It called for the rifle and box to be in place at the assassination site, and for the rifle to be concealed in the box following the shooting. There would be someone with a different rifle, a bolt-action Mannlicher Carcano who would unwittingly be on hand to take the blame. The real assassin's rifle would be so well concealed that it could be smuggled out much later. Shells fired from the Mannlicher Carcano would be placed at the scene. A bullet fired from the Mannlicher Carcano would be planted in an area where it would be discovered and become prime evidence to seal the case against the Mannlicher Carcano and its owner. The bullets for the 7mm check-made automatic were designed to practically disintegrate into untraceable fragments upon impact. The bullets Easterling saw had slits cut in the sides. After relating all this, Manuel Rivera told Easterling that he was going to need his continuing help and gave him another $750. Easterling's next assignment was in May. The Cuban came to his trailer around 8 one morning and said that he needed to borrow his car to transport the box and rifle to Texas. The plan was to hook a U-Haul trailer to the car to carry the large box. Easterling gave Rivera the keys to his car, and Manuel departed, saying he would return the car in a few days. Easterling claims nothing further to do with the transport of the box. His next contact was a few days later when Manuel returned the car. Along with the car keys, Rivera gave Easterling a Time magazine that had $850 tucked inside the pages. All right, so we're in May, folks, and a box containing a check-made, fully automatic 7mm rifle has been dispatched to Dallas, Texas, using Easterling's brand new car.
Was at this moment he knew. He fucked up.
Enter Lee Harvey Oswald. It was deep into a muggy New Orleans night in 1963 when the odd pair entered the Havana bar. One of the men was stockily built, possibly a Cuban, about 28, with a receding hairline. He ordered a tequila. The Latin's companion was an American who seemed to be drunk. It was this young man who made the post-midnight visit memorable. He ordered a lemonade. The first time that drink was ever ordered in the Havana bar. The bartender did not know how to fix it. Horace Pena, the owner of the bar, was asked to give directions on how to make the lemonade. Once the drink was served, the American's companion made a caustic remark about the price of 25 cents set by Pena. He considered this exorbitant and muttered something about Cuban capitalists. Then the American vomited all over the table at which he and his Latin friend were seated. It was only then that they left. Months later, following the assassination of Kennedy, this incident was vividly recalled with unanimity. Is that a word? By those who witnessed it. The identity of the Cuban in the bar that night remains a mystery, although the description of him in Warren Commission records it is virtually identical to Easterling's description of Manuel Rivera. But there is little question about the identity of the American. He was Lee Harvey Oswald. Robert Easterling was not among the witnesses in the Havana bar that night. Easterling claims that he first encountered Oswald during the spring or summer of '63. While he is not sure of the date, Easterling insists that he witnessed an incident involving Oswald and the Havana bar that is unrecorded in standard accounts of Oswald's New Orleans activities. Easterling claims he came upon a sidewalk fracas on Decatur Street near the doorway to the Havana bar. Several Cubans were kicking and stomping a young man Easterling came to know as Oswald. As Easterling stood watching, Rivera rushed out of the bar with a broken beer bottle and forced the men to stop beating Oswald. Police officers arrived at about that time and the scuffle ended. Easterling claims that Oswald got up and without any comment walked away. Easterling did not learn what the altercation was about. Easterling, who saw Oswald on several other occasions that spring, when Rivera and Oswald were together, according to Easterling, they spoke to each other in Russian. Manuel told Easterling that he first met Oswald, hold on folks, in Czechoslovakia when the automatic rifle was built. He said that Oswald fired the rifle and was downright terrible with it. At some point after Hardhat met Oswald, Rivera confided that Oswald was going to take the rap for the assassination, not take a nap, take the rap for the assassination of President Kennedy. Easterling instantly realized this was the man the conspirators had chosen as their dupe, and who would have a Mannlicher Carcano rifle. Manuel explained that it would be necessary to kill Oswald after the assassination. While this did little to clarify in Easterling's mind just what was going on, one chilling fact came into focus, that If Oswald was so expendable, then there was little reason to believe the conspirators would want him, Easterling, around after it was all over. At first, Easterling believed the ballistics evidence generated during the practice firing at the Windmill Trailer Court would be used to cinch the case against Oswald. However, it is a matter of record that Oswald did not order his Mannlicher Carcano until March, while he was still in Dallas. So, if Easterling's account is true, the rifle firing at the trailer park in February was simply a dry run for later doing the same thing with Oswald's rifle. Just one of the many things wrong with this story, folks, and there are many, believe me. By April, Oswald was in New Orleans and apparently had his rifle with him. The setup of the trailer court was such that it would be quite simple for Manuel and his colleagues to return there and conduct additional firings. While Easterling never witnessed such activity, he had moved out of the trailer court by the end of June. Other witnesses have told the author that it was not uncommon to find people target shooting in that particular field. Next up, we have an account of Easterling delivering a suitcase containing $100,000, folks. So it was in a businessman's office that this transaction took place. At about 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, two men arrived. One was the person Easterling believed to be Clay Shaw, who in reality might have been Guy Bannister. The second was a man from Dallas named Jack Ruby. The men checked the cash in the suitcase. Ruby then went to the phone and placed a call to a man in Dallas. After some perfunctory conversation, Ruby handed the phone to his companion, who spoke for several minutes and then hung up. At one point, the businessman asked Ruby if he was going to be able to take care of so much cash. According to Easterling, Ruby pulled back his suit jacket, pointed to a pistol, and said, "Yeah, I got my little heater." As Ruby and his companions left, Easterling looked out at their car and saw two men sitting inside. He believes that they were Manuel Rivera and the Cuban known to Easterling as Joe. It was after the men drove away that the businessman told Easterling that although he was not certain, he suspected that this was all part of a plot to kill President Kennedy. He pulled from his desk a small tape recorder that was attached to his telephone line. He indicated that he had taped the phone call that Jack Ruby had made to Dallas. Now he played the tape so that he and Easterling could hear the entire conversation. What stuck most vividly in Easterling's mind was one comment made by a Dallas oil man. "Don't pay the bastards too much because it will run up the price on Bobby and the rest of them." "Hard hat," the businessman said. "They're going to kill the Kennedys." He then proceeded to burn the tape in an ashtray. I was getting scared, Easterling concedes. And the more he thought about it, the more frightened he became. In addition, the IRS was threatening him for his failure to pay income taxes, and he believed his employer had caught him stealing parts and reselling them. A few days after the meeting at the businessman's office to transfer the cash, Easterling quit his job. According to his wife of that period, he urged her to move into an apartment and to sell the trailer, since the Cubans knew where it was. Hard Hat abruptly left Louisiana and did not stop until he reached Ohio, where he got a job with a construction company. Fearful or not, Easterling knew it would be a mistake to completely sever his relationship with Manuel Rivera. And not long after he reached Ohio, he telephoned Manuel to let him know where he was in case he wanted additional work done. Easterling was greatly attracted to easy money. He called Manuel several more times over the summer to say that he was available. Toward the end of September, Easterling got a message to telephone Manuel, who told him it's time to get Oswald out of town. Manuel told him to return to New Orleans and meet him at the Havana bar. He instructed him to get his fast XL Ford gassed up and ready for travel. During the third week of September, early in the morning, Easterling arrived at the Havana bar. Manuel Rivera was there, along with the Cuban named Joe. The first thing Easterling did was to begin drinking. The fear that had propelled him from New Orleans to Ohio had not moderated upon his return to Decatur Street. Easterling noticed that Manuel had with him the green suitcase with the burn mark. It was the same one Hardhat had bought, packed $100,000 in cash for Jack Ruby and the man who may have been Clay Shaw or Guy Bannister. Easterling observed to Manuel that he recognized the suitcase and assumed that it meant that Manuel had gotten the money. Manuel nodded and smiled. "I like to be paid both ways," he said. To Easterling, these words confirmed that Manuel's activities were serving the interests of both Cuban and domestic conspirators. It was then that Manny picked up the phone, dialed a number, and said, "Hardhat is here, and we are ready. Start the fire." Manuel told Easterling that they would wait about 15 minutes and then pick up Lee Oswald and drive him to Houston. Easterling gulped down several more drinks, and Manuel ordered a full bottle of whiskey for them to drink during their long drive. Rivera and Easterling bade farewell to Joe and walked out of the Havana bar onto Decatur Street. They removed the license plates from Easterling's car, got in, headed across Canal Street where Decatur becomes Magazine Street, and Manuel gave Easterling precise directions about each turn to make. And today Easterling admits his disorientation concerning how they reached the scene of a large fire enough to require several fire trucks and hoses pulled across the street. On the way to the fire, Manuel told Easterling that he knew that Oswald had been under surveillance recently because of his pro-Castro activities with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Manuel said it was necessary to set the fire as a diversionary tactic in order to pick up Oswald surreptitiously in the confusion and get him out of town and on his way to Mexico. Manuel said that he wanted Easterling to drive Oswald all the way, but Oswald insisted on taking the bus. However, when Oswald realized how tight the surveillance on him was, according to Manuel, he agreed to be spirited out of New Orleans so he could catch the bus in Houston. Less than sober by the time they reached the fire, Easterling remembers the fire engines and sirens most vividly. The fact that several times he had to run his car over the fire hoses when, after passing the fire on the right, Manuel ordered him to double back and cross the hoses again. His fuzzy recollection is that the fire was at a church in a black neighborhood. Easterling finally stopped across from the fire and waited while Manuel ran into a building that had some small steps in front. Easterling noticed as he looked across the street that the smoke was coming out of the rear of a wooden building. Manuel promptly returned with Oswald in tow, with his head ducked down as he darted from the building. Oswald got in the back of the seat of the car and stretched out with a blanket over him. Easterling gunned the engine, and they sped away. According to Easterling, men in an unmarked car who could have been FBI gave chase. There was a wild ride along the broad New Orleans streets as Easterling, at speeds of up to 100 miles an hour, headed out of the city. At one point on the outskirts of town, Manuel directed him into a residential section where they pulled into somebody's carport and parked for a little bit, hoping to evade their pursuers. They remained there until the owner of the carport returned home and noticed them. They put the license plate back on and departed. By then, they had eluded their pursuers. On the trip to Houston, Oswald said virtually nothing. Most of the time, he was lying down in the back seat, and during other times, he quietly looked out the window. They made one stop during the 360-mile drive, and Oswald got out to use the restroom and to buy some food and drink. Easterling reports no substantive conversation between Oswald and Rivera. In Houston, the trio went to the bus station. Easterling and Rivera waited in the car while Oswald went in alone. In a few minutes, Oswald returned with a young man who looked strikingly like himself. Manuel introduced the young man as Carlo. Easterling's impression was that Carlo was able to speak very little English. In fact, the only words of English Easterling heard him utter were, "Good luck to you." Easterling claims that Carlo, Manuel, and Oswald all spoke in Russian. Then, a few minutes after their arrival, Manuel asked Easterling to take a photograph of the three of them standing together. Carlo stood on Manuel's left and Oswald on the right. Easterling took the picture with Manuel's camera. Easterling recalls that Carlo was no more than an inch taller than Oswald and a little heavier. Soon after taking the picture, Easterling said farewell to the three men and drove away. Manuel had paid him $1,500 and given him his next assignment to drive to Monterrey, Mexico. He was to wait at a motel there for Oswald to arrive a few days later. Easterling was then to drive Oswald back to Fort Worth. All right, so you can't make this shit up, folks. So now we have this whole thing, meeting up with Oswald, spiriting him away from a fire under the cover of darkness, outrunning FBI agents, all the way to Houston, Texas. And Oswald's going to take a bus to Texas, and this Easterling fellow is driving his car to Monterey to pick up Oswald and bring him back to Fort Worth. Okay. Now, at this point in the story, we have a lot of questionable activities being done here, but we also have some concrete facts, places, and names that can be checked out. And in fact, at the time in the early 80s, Horace Pena was still alive. So it probably behooved the author to talk to him and see if he could corroborate any of this guy's story whatsoever. So according to Easterling's story, God damn it. Oswald was in New Orleans at all the right times in his story. Easterling's employment, as he described it, is verified. His ex-wife is able to corroborate much of his account of the shooting at Windmill Trailer Court. Even a neighbor 20 years later recalled the incident of the Cubans threatening to burn the trailer down. Easterling had returned to the trailer park with the author, and the conditions are just as he described them. On the other hand, Horace Pena, owner of the Havana bar, has told the author that he does not remember a man called Hardhat, nor does Pena recall a man called Joe, who had a deformed hand and hung around his establishment, often tending bar. Pena certainly does not recall an assassination plot against Kennedy being hatched there, although he concedes he heard people in his bar talking about killing the president. Pena confirms that David Ferry and Clay Shaw were both patrons of the bar. Could Pena recall Emmanuel Rivera? He looked at the author and said, "So many people ask me about Manuel Rivera," but yet he didn't exactly explain what that means. While only Easterling places David Ferry with Manuel Rivera and the Czech rifle in the Havana bar, there is other evidence that Ferry did frequent the establishment. Moreover, Ferry can be officially linked with Oswald on 2 occasions. For various reasons, unrelated to his now known Oswald connection, David Ferry was an immediate suspect when President Kennedy was killed. Ferry's ironclad alibi illustrated not only the remarkable diversity of his associations, but his connections with another of the prime elements interested in eliminating Kennedy, organized crime. As we have seen, at the hour of the assassination, Ferry was in a federal courtroom in New Orleans with organized crime boss Carlos Marcello, whose lawyer employed Ferry as an investigator. Federal investigators have found that Marcello himself, a #1 target of Robert Kennedy's Justice Department, had made at least one threat against President Kennedy. As for the June meeting with Jack Ruby, the New Orleans businessman, and possibly Shaw or Bannister, there are some significant points of confirmation. According to the official record, Ruby did visit New Orleans in June of 1963. Moreover, it is known that while there, Ruby spent most of the time in association with club operators whose ties, even if informal and associative, ran to the organized crime family of Carlos Marcello. One of the club operators, a Harold Tannenbaum, was listed by the Select Committee as deceased. Quite alive, Tannenbaum had confirmed to the author his own contact with Ruby in New Orleans at this time, though he denies the mob links attributed to him by the HSCA. As for Easterling's claim that he encountered Oswald in a street scuffle unreported for the official record, there is tempting confirmation from an extremely obscure aspect of Oswald's murky biography. On August the 1st, 1963, Oswald wrote a letter to the head of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New York and reported that during his efforts to distribute handbills, he had been attacked by some Cuban exiles and that the incident robbed me of what support I had, leaving me alone. Oswald also wrote that he was officially cautioned by police. The trouble with this account has always been that it was written more than a week prior to the date Oswald was arrested in the street scuffle. This anachronism has been cited by researchers as evidence that Oswald already was planning to stage an event that would lead to his arrest when he wrote to the FPCC on August 1st. It was just as possible that the incident is the very one reported by Easterling, who also noted that the police showed up briefly. So yeah, folks, this is yeah, I always thought it was odd that he wrote a letter to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee talking about, a street scuffle, um, while he was handing out handbills, 9 days before it actually happened. But what if this other incident actually took place? Very interesting stuff. Another confirming detail is that Easterling's acquaintance and association with the wealthy businessman whom he claims he met with that Sunday morning to transfer the cash. That man, while denouncing Easterling as a drunken liar and scum of the earth, concedes that he knew Hard Hat over a number of years. He insists that he never engaged in any discussion of politics with him. He claims he has no particular political interests beyond casting his ballot. The businessman strenuously denies ever having a meeting such as the one described by Easterling. However, he concedes his business connection to the Dallas oil man in question, but insists he never met him or talked to him even on the phone. In a telephone call from Easterling to the New Orleans businessman in May of 1983, the businessman told Hard Hat, "If a word of this gets printed, I guarantee you one thing, you will regret it to the last day you live." There is a fascinating array of purely circumstantial evidence indicating the businessman's preoccupation with the JFK assassination, details completely unknown to Easterling. However, insomuch as it is entirely possible that the businessman is telling the truth in his denials, he has not been identified here. Perhaps the most significant point of confirmation for Easterling's story has to do with his claim to have driven Oswald from New Orleans to Houston. There has never been any official explanation as to how Oswald got from New Orleans to Houston towards the end of September. Despite a strenuous investigation aimed at discovering how Oswald made the trip, it seems nearly certain that he did not use any public transportation for the trip. But there has never, until now, been a rational conjecture about the details of this private transportation. In addition to this mystery is the question of the precise date of Oswald's departure from New Orleans. It has been established that Oswald's wife Marina packed a friend's station wagon and left New Orleans with a baby and friend on September the 23rd to return to Dallas. The last certain sighting of Oswald in New Orleans also occurred on that date. As to events following the sighting, Oswald's boarding a bus near his apartment on the evening of September the 23rd, a highly ambiguous paper trail, suggests that Oswald remained in New Orleans as late as September 25th. Among the bits of evidence are the cashing of a check and the completion of a change of address card. However, if one is going to posit a conspiracy, as did the HSCA, these transactions were conceivably carried out by someone other than Oswald. In any event, not a single witness in the official record could recall seeing Oswald in New Orleans after September 23rd. Now, back to that fire, when they went to pick Oswald up. Easterling was adamant that there was a fire, that he did run over hoses, and that there was a church nearby, and that it did happen in the area bordered by Canal and Magazine Streets south of Claiborne Avenue. Initially, the investigation of this appeared hopeless. The New Orleans Fire Department claimed that the central fire records for those years could not be found. Newspapers reported no fires that could conceivably be the one described by Easterling. Arson records showed no cases pursued on fires that occurred around that time. Despite the author's strenuous assertions that he was lying, Easterling could not be shaken from his claim about the fire. It was then that investigator Tom Noonan, working with the author, made a startling discovery in the basement of the New Orleans Public Library. Many of the original fire report ledgers that had been kept at each firehouse in the city actually existed, and even through the central records, which were based on these originals, could not be found. There, on a long ledger sheet, and in the clear handwriting of a New Orleans fireman, was an entry for September the 24th, 1963, the morning after the last known sighting of Oswald. The report of a fire was first received at 9:22 a.m. The structure involved was an old two-story wooden apartment building located in a black section of town diagonally across from a church. The address, 2011 Melpomene, was no more than a couple of minutes' drive from where Easterling originally believed he and Manuel picked up Oswald. The fire report itself was unusual. For all of September 1963, in the 2nd Fire District, there were 119 reports of fires listed in the ledgers. Of those, only 3 were reported to be under investigation. Perhaps most significant of all was the cause of the fire appeared apparently suspicious, for the fireman noted that it was under investigation. So out of 119 fire reports, only 3 were suspected arson, including this one. A key question was whether hoses might have been pulled across the street to reach the blaze at 2011 Melpomene. Inspection of that scene shows that the closest fire hydrant to the address was diagonally across the street and in front of the Israelite Baptist Church. It would have been necessary to pull the hoses across the street if the pumper on the scene did not have sufficient water. A point of fact now uncheckable, because New Orleans, like most cities, has a law that prohibits driving across fire hoses. However, conversations with veteran New Orleans firemen indicate that it was a law rarely enforced 22 years ago. At the time of the 1963 fire, the address in question was in the heart of a rundown neighborhood primarily consisting of black families. Across from 2011 Melpomene was a small apartment building and 2 family houses of similar construction, as well as a larger building that housed the Tennessee Furniture Company. That building, it would appear, is most likely one for Oswald to have emerged from. Residents of the street recall that it had a few steps leading up to a narrow stoop at the front. Other steps were on the side that led to small apartments. Today, the entire block from 2011 Melpomene has been torn down, and in place of the old building stands a modern fire station, ironically enough. So let's talk about the Odio incident for a minute, since this is around the same time that all this stuff happened. Apparently, Easterling dropped off Oswald and 2 other Latins, Carlo and Manuel Rivera, in Fort Worth, or Houston. I'm sorry, Houston. So questions remain about the dominant figure in the trio that visited Mrs. Odio. He was a Cuban who called himself Leopoldo. Described as tall, slim, and wearing glasses, his appearance is starkly different from Easterling's description of Manuel Rivera. However, the third man, who was called something like Angelo, was described by Mrs. Odio in terms that are strikingly similar to Easterling's description of Manuel. She recalled him as a man of medium height, stocky build, with heavy body hair. She recalled dark markings on his skin, which could have possibly be related to the birthmark Easterling claims was visible on Manuel's neck. Mrs. Odio also recalled that one of the Cubans had sort of a bald spot in the front, which coincides with Easterling's claim that Manuel had a receding hairline. In addition, Mrs. Odio's description of Angelo had parallels that of a man who appeared with Oswald in the Havana bar, a man who might have been Manuel Rivera. While no sure conclusions can be drawn from the parallels between Easterling and Odio descriptions, one thing is inescapable. If there is truth to the Easterling story, the man he knew as Manuel Rivera probably was not the dominant figure in the conspiracy. That figure would not be shooting into water barrels and dealing with the likes of Robert Easterling. That figure would, logically, be Manuel's superior. In this context, it is not unreasonable to speculate that there was a third man in Houston, one who joined Manuel and Carlo after Easterling left for Mexico. Perhaps that man, Manuel's boss, was the Leopoldo who appeared at the Odio home to create one of the most memorable events that later would spring up to seal the guilt of Lee Harvey Oswald. Interesting. So for 10 days, Robert Easterling waited at a motel in Monterrey, Mexico for Lee Harvey Oswald. When he realized that Oswald was not going to show up, he left and drove to several spots in Mexico. Then he drove back to Baton Rouge and went to work operating a bulldozer on a construction project in St. Francisville, Louisiana. By now, it was mid-October. Easterling's days alone in Mexico had given him time to realize, as he puts it, that my life wasn't worth a plugged nickel. Never a stupid man, Easterling understood that he and perhaps others were every bit as expendable as Lee Harvey Oswald. He was glad that Oswald had stood him up in Mexico and half hoped that he was finished with carrying out assignments for Rivera. Then, one rainy day in early November, when he could not work, Easterling began drinking. He telephoned Manuel Rivera at his number in New Orleans. In the course of conversation, he mentioned the name of the motel where he was staying in Baton Rouge, and Manuel said that he was going to have a new assignment for him soon. A few days after that, several Cubans arrived at the motel and told Easterling that Manuel had sent them to make certain Easterling had not wavered in his readiness to follow orders. Easterling assured them of his steady loyalty to the cause. The Cubans told him when to phone Manuel for his next assignment. They threatened to return if he failed to call. And so, on Tuesday, November 19th, Easterling telephoned the number where he had always reached Manuel. During this time, instead, David Ferry answered the phone. Manuel had gone to Dallas, and Easterling's assignment, Ferry said, would be at a bus station in Dallas around 10:30 this coming Friday morning. Ferry said that he would find Oswald waiting for him there, and Easterling was to drive Oswald to Mexico City, where Manuel would meet them. Easterling promised Ferry he would be in Dallas on November 22nd to pick up Lee Harvey Oswald. The next 2 days were among the most terrible in his life. If he went through with his assignment, picking up Oswald in Dallas, he was sure he would be killed along with Lee once they reached Mexico. On the other hand, Manuel's henchmen had repeatedly threatened at Easterling, and at any moment, they could appear as they had in the past. If he actually skipped out on the assignment, he knew they would not hesitate to kill him. So Robert Easterling is hard to salvage much honor from his role in these matters, but he is without shame when it comes to making the attempt. He asserts that through the entire time, he was working as an informant for the FBI. At the behest of the CIA, though he admits he never tried to report the developing conspiracy. But on Thursday, November the 21st, he claims with frantic sincerity the pressures of fear, confusion, and drunkenness conspired to drive him to drastic measures. So that evening, On November the 21st, 1963, at 9:30 p.m., he went to a public telephone booth at a service station just outside of Baton Rouge. He dialed the operator and asked to be put through to J. Edgar Hoover. "They're going to kill the president," he shouted to the operator. Soon enough, Easterling says, he was speaking to someone at FBI headquarters in Washington. The man asked if Easterling owned a yellow and black Ford XL. Easterling said that he did. "You're in too deep," Easterling says the FBI man told him. "You're going to get killed. We have lines open to Dallas now." "But they're going to kill the president," Easterling shouted. "They have an automatic rifle with a catch box on the side." We know all about it," said the FBI man, according to Easterling. "We're going to catch them red-handed. You're in too deep. Whatever you do, don't go to Dallas." And Easterling hung up. The FBI denies that it ever had any sort of informant relationship with Easterling, shockingly enough. And according to an official bureau statement, there is nothing in FBI files to substantiate Mr. Easterling's claim that he did call the FBI on the night of November 21st, 1963. Indeed, it's preposterous to think that anyone at the Bureau would have made the statements Easterling claims were made to him that night. However, much of what Easterling claims happened in the next few hours have been confirmed. Before long, it was past midnight. The calendar slipped to November 22nd, 1963, and there was but one rational course of action for Easterling. He would commit a burglary that, if ever needed, could provide a solid alibi if anyone tried to link him to the assassination. And at any time he felt in danger from his co-conspirators, he could find safety by confessing to the break-in and being jailed. Sounds a little bit like Richard Case Nagel shit, right? On Airline Highway outside of Baton Rouge, there was a Gibson's Discount Center, a place Easterling had cased many times as he cashed his paychecks there. At about 1:30 a.m., he parked his car a block from the store and walked to it with a sledgehammer. He hammered his way through concrete blocks and entered the building. Once inside, he immediately encountered a night watchman. Easterling fled to his car and took off at high speed. Almost at once, perhaps even before the break-in was reported, a police car gave hot pursuit. After a high-speed chase, Easterling crashed his car into a ditch. He jumped out and ran. For the rest of the night, he walked and hid as he made his way toward the construction job, where soon after daybreak Friday morning he could collect a paycheck. After cashing his check, Easterling caught a ride to a town where he could get a bus to Jackson, Mississippi. As he got off the bus in Jackson, he heard the first radio reports of the shooting of the president. He checked into the Heidelberg Hotel, Jackson's finest, and ordered up a supply of whiskey. He spent the next 3 days watching the events of Dallas unfold on television. Those events sealed forever any doubt in Easterling's mind about his fate if he had gone to Dallas. By Monday, Oswald had been murdered, and Ruby was being held as his killer. Now, using an assumed name, Easterling left the hotel and traveled to his mother's home near Hattiesburg, Mississippi, to tell her he would have to go away, perhaps for a long time. The next day, he caught a bus out of Mississippi. He cracked the safe in a small supermarket in Hagerstown, Maryland, and stole about $3,000, which enabled him to continue his travels. As those funds ran low, Easterling headed south and stopped in Durham, North Carolina, where he broke into a Chevy dealership. He cracked the safe and stole several $1,000s and made a clean getaway. 20 years later, Durham police confirmed such a break-in at Carpenter Chevrolet on December 17, 1963. The police also confirmed Easterling's claim that the safe was on the second floor. The Durham authorities said the crime has never been solved. By early 1964, Easterling was back in Hattiesburg and hiding out with relatives. On February the 22nd, the FBI picked him up on a fugitive warrant and returned him to Baton Rouge to face charges for the break-in there on November the 22nd, 1963. When the time came in his trial to offer a defense for his activities, Easterling pleaded guilty without comment. His lawyer, today a judge in Louisiana, remembers that Easterling seemed resigned to plead guilty and be sentenced with as little protest as possible. Court records show that for the November 22nd break-in, Easterling was sentenced to 5 years in the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. In the FBI's official comment concerning Easterling's confession, a statement was offered that lent curious support to one of Easterling's claims, that the FBI has never listened seriously to him. In a letter to the author, the FBI stated, quote, "The following information, which appears in our files, tends to indicate that Mr. Easterling's allegations regarding the assassination are unsupported by facts. Mr. Easterling was not in Dallas, Texas on November the 22nd with Lee Harvey Oswald's clone, as Mr. Easterling claims. He was fleeing the local authorities in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who had interrupted his burglary of Gibson's Discount Center on November 22nd, 1963. Mr. Easterling outdistanced his pursuers." So, in its haste to discredit Easterling's allegations, the Bureau demonstrates that despite its claims to the contrary, it never took Easterling's confession seriously enough, to realize that he does not claim to have been in Dallas with Lee Harvey Oswald's clone. If the FBI is in possession of a prior statement to this effect, it has never disclosed it, despite repeated efforts by the author to secure all of its information about Easterling. Easterling claims to have been doing precisely what the FBI investigation finds that he was doing during the early hours of November 22nd. If nothing else, this demonstrates that as late as September 63, the FBI continued to pay no serious attention to Easterling's claims. The familiar indifference that Easterling asserts met all of his earlier efforts to inform the authorities. It is a crowning irony that Easterling's position should receive convincing FBI corroboration on the critical point of whether the Bureau has ever paid serious attention to his account. Clearly, the FBI in reality has given only perfunctory attention to those allegations with potentially awesome significance. And now, like Paul Harvey says, are you ready for the rest of the story? So, as Easterling's own admissions, he doesn't really know exactly what happened on November 22nd, 1963, as he chose not to go to Dallas. So some years later, according to him, he had met a man by the name of Francisco of the Cuban intelligence services, and Francisco gave him a full report that was based, he said, on what Manuel Ray told him, or Manuel Rivera, sorry. Shortly before the motorcade was due to arrive in Dealey Plaza, Manuel took advantage of the gathering crowd to slip into the book depository. Presumably, it was not his first visit. He made his way to the 6th floor, overlooking the spacious plaza area below. He located his special box, even though there were dozens of other boxes of varying descriptions in the cavernous warehouse-like room. Harlow, the Oswald lookalike, was already in the building. Numerous people saw him and later remembered him. Like the real Oswald, he kept to himself and said little. Since mid-morning, the real Lee Harvey Oswald had been at the bus station a few blocks away, waiting to be picked up by Robert Easterling. During the minutes before the arrival of the motorcade, Manuel and Carlo made their preparations. They made sure the Mannlicher Carcano, the Oswald rifle, was stashed between some boxes at the other end of the room. Francisco claimed that they then took 3 empty cartridge shells that had been fired earlier from the Oswald rifle and placed them on the floor beside the assassin's window. Manuel removed the check rifle from the special box and checked it over. It was all was ready. Manuel stood back from the window as he watched the presidential motorcade approaching his position. He could see the tan and smiling face of John Kennedy as he waved to the cheering crowds. As the president's limo made the turn from Houston onto Elm, just below him, Manuel stepped to the window and crouched. The head of the president filled the rifle scope. Manuel took a deep breath, expelled it slowly, and then squeezed the trigger. With stunning speed and accuracy, he fired 3 times at 5.6 seconds to strike his moving target. His firing time had been even better on the coconuts, but this got the job done. Manuel waited a fraction of a second after the last shot to see if another was needed, but he could see that it wasn't necessary. He had blown apart the president's head. Moving quickly, Manuel returned the check rifle to its hiding place beneath the false bottom of the special box. At that moment, Carlo was dawdling about at the soda machine 4 floors below. He was challenged by a police officer who was rushing past him to reach the upper floors of the building. But Carlo remained calm and said nothing. A man who worked in the building told policemen that Carlo, who he believed would be Oswald, worked there. Carlo then made his way out of the building and melted away into the hysterical crowds. Within minutes, Manuel Rivera had left the building. At the parking lot, he and Carlo got into a car and were on their way home. At some point, a little later, the nearly perfect bullet that had been fired from the Oswald rifle into a water barrel was placed on an unattended stretcher in a public corridor at Parkland Hospital, where the dying president had been taken. There was much Francisco did not tell Easterling. He did not say how it was arranged for Ruby to kill Oswald once Hardhat failed to pick him up and take him to Mexico. He did not say what Oswald believed his role to be. However, he did explain that it was necessary to wait 7 months before finding the opportunity to retrieve the special box and the check rifle from the book depository and return them to Cuba. Among the items on the 6th floor that day were a few small cardboard cartons, now empty. The most prominent items on the floor were at least 7 heavy wooden boxes. While not all the same size, the empty boxes were generally of odd dimensions, strikingly similar to the box described by Easterling. The boxes were stamped with the names of publishing companies such as Bobbs Merrill and addressed to the Texas School Book Depository. One of the boxes, for example, bore a stamp which indicated it had once been used to ship 500 copies of The Red Pony. Jordan Shook, a former Dallas official who played an important role in the preservation of the building, is regarded as an expert on the building and its usage since 1963. He explained that at one point everything on the 6th floor was moved to another floor. Later, some of the things were returned to the 6th floor. Shook stated that there had been no reason to keep track of what was moved there. While no one can confirm that the boxes were on the 6th floor in 1963, it is also impossible to state that they were never there. In any case, it is virtually indisputable that such boxes were somewhere in the building, and quite possibly on the 6th floor. Days before the Warren Commission issued its report, someone apparently became concerned that the, quote, cardboard cartons piled around the sniper's window to ensure seclusion might have been too heavy to be moved by one man. Such a fact would, of course, indicate the presence of more than one man, suggesting a conspiracy. On September 11, 1964, the FBI hastily interviewed the superintendent of the book depository and reported that none of the cartons around the window was too heavy to be handled by one man. The report also consists of a statement that there were no cartons on the 6th floor, which could not have been handled by one man. The cover sheet on the FBI report indicates that it is concerned with cardboard cartons. It seems certain that the cardboard cartons are distinctly different and could not possibly confuse with a large, heavy wooden box, such as the one described by Easterling and also used to ship books to the school book depository. The most stunning evidence that wooden boxes such as those were at least in proximity to the 6th floor is found in a photograph taken on the 5th floor after the assassination. It appears in the Warren Commission exhibits, but it is not published in the Warren Report. The covers of the photographs show the 3 men who were on the 5th floor at the time of the assassination. And there, at the edge of the photograph, are at least 2 of the wooden boxes apparently being used as storage bins. They are located right beside the stairwell, the only one leading down from the 6th floor. There are credible reports of a man believed to be a Cuban who was seen in Dealey Plaza just after the assassination. He was seen in a light-colored car. There's even a photograph of a light-colored Rambler station wagon as it passes in front of the TSBD building. A police officer has sworn that he saw a man who looked like Oswald get into it. He watched as the car was driven away, heading out of town. Robert Blakey, chief counsel of the House Select Committee, once told the author in an informal discussion that based on his own studies, he theorizes that an assassin, in addition to Oswald, would be a Latin man between the ages of 25 and 35 from either Miami or New Orleans. There is no indication that Blakey knows anything about anybody named Manuel Rivera. The case against Lee Harvey Oswald has always been circumstantial at best. No reliable witnesses ever placed him in the assassin's lair. The FBI lab cannot find Oswald's fingerprints on the rifle. There is only the most tenuous evidence to indicate that Oswald ever took the Manulica or Carcano into the building. Evidence that would be severely challenged in court. In the final analysis, it is not impossible to prove that the Easterling confession is true. However, it is possible to show that there is at least every reason for the FBI to investigate Easterling's leads vigorously. The evidence provided to the author by the FBI shows persuasively that a shocking indifference, even a sloppiness, continues to mark the FBI's position on Easterling. It is also astonishing that the FBI's official position is that Easterling was, quote, not in Dallas with Oswald's clone, as Mr. Easterling claims. This shows that the Bureau has never really listened to what Easterling is saying. Another example of this official indifference concerns Easterling's claim to have participated in the bombing of a commercial airliner en route to New Orleans from Tampa. No such bombing ever occurred, states the FBI. The Bureau statement goes on to describe the crash of an airliner flying from Miami to New Orleans on the date in question, a plane that did crash and for which there is no certain official explanation. If the FBI had taken Easterling's allegations seriously, it would have investigated the case sufficiently to learn that the flight it referred to from Miami to New Orleans made a stop in Tampa prior to the fatal crash. That, according to Easterling, is where he helped place the explosives on board. The crash occurred after the plane took off from Tampa. The point here is not whether Easterling really bombed the plane, but that the FBI has not taken what he says with enough seriousness to even make the simplest investigation. During the months of his contact with this author, Robert Easterling lived with his elderly mother in a small home in the quiet countryside of Raw Springs, Mississippi. In the spring of 1983, he was jailed for drunk driving and hospitalized for various medical problems, including a heart attack. And then, on July 31st, 1983, Robert Easterling went berserk at his home. His mother fled the house. Easterling terrorized his family by threatening to burn down the house. For more than 12 hours, he systematically went through the house with a hammer, smashing every piece of glass, including dozens of family treasures. He used razors to slash the furniture. Well, you can't blow up the goddamn airplane and kill presidents and all that. And when you get as close to dying as I am, hell, it worries you. And that, folks, is the story of Robert Easterling. Now, thank you for following along. Make sure you're following along on Twitter and TikTok at The Lone Gunman 7. The Facebook page is, of course, The Lone Gunman Facebook page. our podcast page on Facebook and on YouTube. Search for the Lone Gunman Podcast channel. And now, as promised, the eagerly awaited debut of the new song called Conspiracy by Shepherd on Fire. For my buddy Roger, I give it to you. Roger, take it away, buddy.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.